The hardened settler offspring on the eastern frontier, staging ground for the push into the Wild West, created new clusters of settlements along both banks of the Mississippi. The Missouri River, too, took an aura of beckoning sirens, luring a restless class.
Eastward I go only by force, but westward I go free, the prevailing tendency of my countrymen.
Henry David Thoreau.
Westward the course of empire takes its way.
George Berkeley. In early 1976, Continental Congress delegates chose Tom Jefferson to draft the Declaration of Independence. By July 4, the Declaration was made and endorsed by 12 states. New York state representatives held out for a short time, but on July 9, the New York Provincial Congress joined the Union, stretching from Maine to East Florida. The self-evident truths spelled out in Jefferson's document became a framework for future reference to the rights of mankind and the purpose of government to champion them. Grievances against King George II are also spelled out. The last statement of the Declaration absolves the colonies of all fealty to the Crown of England.
That these united colonies are, and of right, ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved.
This is also known as Lee's Resolution, proposed by Virginia delegate Richard Henry Lee. After serving in various government posts with distinction, the Democratic-Republican Party candidate, Vice President Thomas Jefferson, in 1800 defeated the Federalist Party candidate and incumbent President John Adams. Actually, that election first resulted in a tie between Jefferson and Aaron Burr, with Adams not far behind. Under the Constitution, the election was shuffled to the House of Representatives, which, after more than 30 ballots, chose Jefferson. Aaron Burr was vice president until 1805, but Burr's killing of Alexander Hamilton by duel ended his Eastern political career. "We are all Republicans. We are all Federalists," Jefferson told listeners to his inaugural speech. The country's politics were not entirely amicable. Hamilton's demise and Jefferson's reach across philosophies reflected a lingering distrust between the frontier and Eastern establishment priorities. Still, Jefferson was somewhat progressive in nature, as he maintained an avid curiosity in scientific exploits throughout his life. While president, he chose a like-minded individual to be his personal private secretary, Meriwether Lewis. Both persons were plantation owners and experienced managers of thousands of acres of land. Their properties also were near neighborly in the area of Charlottesville, Virginia. Jefferson had told a Philosophical Society meeting in Philadelphia in 1796 that there were no reliable maps of Western lands. One of his main goals, not surprisingly, for the Lewis and Clark expedition, the Corps of Discovery, was to map and describe the natural characteristics of the newly acquired lands and its inhabitants. Lewis and Clark also both fit in Jefferson's related objective then to establish contact with as many indigenous people as the exploring party could and to understand, quote, the extent and limits of their possessions. The land that France deeded to the U.S. in the Louisiana Purchase was not empty. Almost 100 years before, in 1714, Etienne de Bourgmont, a Frenchman, had already explored a large part of the Missouri Valley and produced 2 documents reporting his experience. Around 1740, fur traders, the Mallet brothers, wandered a couple of thousand miles into and out of the Rocky Mountains. St. Louis was taking shape as a settlement around 1764 at the confluence of the Missouri and Mississippi rivers. Even earlier in the 17th century, Father Jacques Marquette and trader Louis Joliet led a group of Frenchmen exploring the Mississippi River. In 1800, Spain generally governed the frontier west of the Mississippi. St. Louis and New Orleans were key to American frontier commercial deals. About 5 million inhabitants, black and white, existed on the American-controlled lands. Families in the Trans-Appalachia were most prolific in expanding the baby population. There, British and Spanish influences had been seriously smothered by the Jay's Treaty with Britain in 1794 and the Treaty of San Lorenzo with Spain a year later. Many books have been written about the greatest official Pathfinder mission completed in the history of North America, the Lewis and Clark Expedition, or Corps of Discovery. The mutual curiosity, perseverance, and execution of orders of that band of brothers and one Shoshone squaw, Sacagawea, lit a fresh fire under the ambitions of settlers back east, and the flame persists today. No matter what time in history, every visitor is invited to sit by the fire and listen to a retelling of their achievement. The implications, good and bad, positive and negative, will always be instructive and deserve a rehearing.
It is impossible not to look forward to distant times when our rapid multiplication will expand itself beyond those limits and cover the whole northern, if not the southern continent, with a people speaking the same language, governed in similar forms and by similar laws.
President Jefferson wrote to James Monroe in 1801. The U.S. Senate ratified the purchase of the Louisiana Territory from Napoleon by a vote of 24-7 on October 20, 1803. The U.S. President had already secretly outlined his plans to Congress for the exploration of the land months earlier. 3 cents an acre was the cost of the Louisiana purchase. Not a bad deal. Napoleon had had enough of bad news from the colonies. Damn sugar, damn coffee, damn colonies, the French emperor had shouted, according to some accounts. Months before ratification, as noted, President Jefferson confided confidentially to Congress,
The river Missouri and the Indians inhabit are not as well known as rendered desirable by their connection with the Mississippi, and consequently with us. An intelligent officer with 10 or 12 chosen might explore, even to the Western Ocean.
Lewis received his commission from Jefferson promptly.
To Meriwether Lewis, Esquire, the 1st Regiment of Infantry of the United States of America, your situation as Secretary of the President of the United States has made you acquainted with the objects of my confidential message of January 18, 1803, to the legislature. You have seen the act they passed, which, though expressed in general terms, was meant to sanction those objects, and you are appointed to carry them into execution. The object of your mission is to explore the Missouri River and such principal stream of it, as by its course and communication with the waters of the Pacific Ocean may offer the most direct and practical water communication across this continent for the purposes of commerce.
Jefferson. The turn of the 18th century was a rough and tumble time politically for the fragile new Republic of the United States. Jefferson and Jeffersonians, later Republicans, represented a more liberal-minded attention to governing than the heretofore entrenched Federalist worldview, aligned philosophically with the George Washington, John Adams, Alexander Hamilton, and a heavily populated Federalist army. Jefferson sought to halve the size of that army after assuming the office of president. He chose the much younger Meriwether as his private advisor and assistant, presumably because Lewis was like-minded, an inquiring and restless soul with plantation upbringing, but occasional inclination to dramatic risk-taking. Meriwether also apparently was a quick learner. Lewis lived with the president himself over a period of time and was often one of the many distinguished guests invited to Jefferson's table, including notables of that time like Thomas Paine, portraitist Charles Willson Peale, poets, and politicians. Jefferson trusted Lewis's, quote, sound understanding and fidelity to the truth, but conceded he had noticed at times that Meriwether drifted into short periods of sensible depressions. According to Jefferson, this characteristic was a nature of Lewis's family. Quote,
I estimated their course by what I had seen in the family.
The era opened with warring in Europe, revolutionary excess in France, and partisan political haggling in the U.S. amidst great distrust between the parties of the frontier and the perceived elitists of the eastern states. Thomas Paine, writer of such books as Common Sense and The Rights of Man, or pamphlets rather, considered to be an uncompromising radical advocate of commoner revolution, was a contemporary of Washington and Jefferson, but both American leaders kept a discreet distance from his wildly popular pamphlet campaigns at the time. Jefferson apparently being much more sympathetic than George. Paine wrote, there are men in all countries who get their living by war and by keeping up the quarrels of nations. This is shocking as it is true, but when those who are concerned in the government of a country make it their study to sow just cause and cultivate prejudices between nations, it becomes unpardonable. On a more personal level, dueling in the U.S. was a gentleman's exercise, although a practice explicitly forbidden in the Army rules. The Burr-Hamilton duel and Hamilton's demise is burned in the memory of history. Lewis himself was court-martialed while serving under General Anthony Wayne after a drunken confrontation with a fellow officer. He was found to be not guilty. Wayne and other military commanders sometimes looked the other way when these kinds of infractions occurred because it seemed more efficient to let their men settle quarrels with pistols then expend the time and cost of legal proceedings. Meriwether Lewis apparently did have a precarious relationship with strong drink at times in his youth and later in his rather short life. Drunkenness may have contributed to his reported suicidal moments and death by assumed but unproven suicide. He reportedly, though not confirmed, suffered bouts of malaria incurred earlier in life. Also, William Clark, born also on a Virginia plantation, and younger brother of Ohio Valley military campaigner George Rogers Clark, served under General Wayne, as did Lewis. Clark helped supply forts along the Ohio River and commanded the Chosen Rifle Company at the Battle of Fallen Timbers in 1794. The decisive battle that essentially ended the Indian Wars of the Northwest Territory. He, though, displayed a liking for Indians, a crucial sentiment for the upcoming journey across the continent. He was even rumored to have fathered a son, daytime smoker, with the daughter of Nez Perce Chief Red Grizzly Bear. Though Clark attempted to champion tolerant relations between the settlers and Indians later, while governor of the Missouri region, many critics alleged he was too sympathetic to Native Americans. At the conclusion of the expedition in 1806, the U.S. Congress awarded Clark double pay and 1,600 acres of land. President Jefferson appointed Clark Brigadier General of Militia for the Louisiana, later Missouri, Territory, and a federal Indian agent for Western tribes. Clark then partnered with Manuel Lisa in the St. Louis, Missouri Fur Company in 1809. Lisa's management of that endeavor is another significant story. The first foreign settlement in Nebraska named their plot of land Fort Lisa